Alright everybody, so in today's video we're going to talk about cam selection for our hilarious little motors. Basically specs, lifts, the math behind it, and how to get the most for your money based on your information. So, as my slogan usually is, don't just build your motor, engineer it. So, I'm just going to go through this bit by bit. And I'm just going to explain everything that really you need to know about your cam selection and how to poor man's degree it. So first I'm going to go with cams themselves. In terms of how they're ground, what happens. So whenever you get a cam, usually you'll see on the website it's either a regrind or it's a whole new cam. And what they're doing is, on your cam itself, you have like those little spots underneath and they grind them flat. That way you adjust your rocker arms to accompany for the little slack. It's not there anymore. So if you were to cut the cam in half and look at it, essentially what they did is they ground away this little piece on the outside of the circle, or like that main tube that is the cam. And now it's all just lift. So, fun little formula for this is, because sometimes these are the same. However, this grind away the little piece and you get more lift. Well, how do they do that? You have this distance minus the distance on the bottom. So the distance of lift minus the distance here, since there's nothing, is just all that lift. However, the distance of lift here minus the distance on the bottom gives you a smaller amount of lift. So basically, when you go and you tighten up your rocker arms, that will then be on your spring, and then go to your valve, you're going to account for that missing space right here, up here. So that's basically how you then get more lift out of here. So now that you understand how that goes on, there are three things you need to pay attention to. That is the duration of the cam, your lobe separation, and your lift. Now, since you're adjusting right here for the slack, or basically what's not there anymore, you're directly proportional. This is directly proportional to the lift. So let's say you have a cam that's got 5 thousandths lift, so half an inch. Basically, it'd be like this on the cam card. So basically what this is right here, which is what you get when you buy a cam. And you'll notice that whenever you do buy a cam, they're always, usually for the most part, and this is where I'll get into BRD later, as opposed to Schneider, Isky, whoever else, Crower, they will grind your cam to a ratio of 1.4. And what that ratio is if you have your rocker arm, and this is where your push rod is, and this is where your spring is, whatever's going off here at a ratio of 1 is then multiplied as a ratio of 1 to 4. Now, this is actually important because this is where we're going to go into that really simple math on basically how to get what cam you're actually going to receive, depending on what the website says. So duration, this is where you see the 280s, the 302, 256, as some of you may know from BRD. Basically the duration is just how long that valve is going to be open or the event is happening in degrees of rotation around your main pulley, the damper in the front. Lobe separation is what's going to give you the thump of the cam. So this is where you see people say, oh, I threw in a big cam. Well, okay, yeah, you can throw in a big cam. You know, if you have a bigger lift, that's technically a bigger cam. If you have more duration, that's technically a bigger cam. The lobe separation is where you're going to get your, that's where this is going to be. Typically, the more overlap that you have, so the smaller the angle of lobe separation, the more thumpity it'll be. The wider lobe separation angle, so your lobes as they're going and rotating, the quieter, the more tame it's going to sound. So if you have a lobe separation angle of, say, 107. It's going to be thumpy. If you have one of like 110 or 112, it's going to be quieter. It's going to sound more tame. The lift, that's pretty self-explanatory. That's the lift, or at least the overall valve lift. That's going to be the lift from the actual valve seat and the valve itself. So this little distance right here. This is also directly proportional. You can solve it out with what I'm going to show you here, with the valve lift or with the cam lift. The cam lift is going to be the absolute lift that's coming out of this. The valve lift is always the one that's variable depending on what they ground your cam to. Given all of this, I'm now going to show you the simple math that they use to figure out what cam you're actually getting. Now, given that most of my brethren are of the Puerto Rican tribe, everybody goes for a 280. 280 cam. I want a 280 cam. If you want to wake up a 3TC, use a 280 cam. Well, what is a 280 cam, and why is it that you don't actually have a 280 cam even though you bought one? So, what they do is they grind, most people, and we're going to stick with this number, grind the cam to 1.4. And that's basically your 280 cam at 1.4. So we'll do 280 under 1.4. If you want to keep it a little cleaner, you could do 280 over 1.4. And what you need to remember is that the stock Toyota rocker arm ratio is a 1 to 1.32. So it's not a 1.4, it's smaller, and that actually affects that number. So you have a 1.32, but now we want to know what size cam is it actually running like, since you only have this and they ground it to this. Well, it's simple, you just put an X. Well, that doesn't tell me anything. Well, it will. All you got to do is get a calculator, any kind, it doesn't matter. Multiply these two and these two. So 1.4x is equal to whatever that comes out to. So we take a calculator. This is too much for what we're doing here, but oh well. 280 times 1.32. You get a total number of 369.4. Now, my bad. 369.6. Yes, excellent. Divide 1.4 by 369.6, and all that's going to be left is X. X is now going to be what your cam is actually going to run like in your block. So 369 divided by 1.4, you get 264. So even though you bought a 280, and is ground to 1.4, what you actually will be running and what it will be behaving as is a 264 cam. That kind of sucks, doesn't it? Well, that's what it is. Now, why do I mention BRD when I talk about this? Simple. You ask them, hey, I want, and most people want is just to wake up a 3T, because usually you're daily driving it. And I mean, if you're building it for racing, go ahead, go for a bigger cam. But they're going to be like, oh, you don't need a 280, and they try to give you their cam for your build. They tell you what you want, and that could piss a lot of people off. So one of the biggest, one of the popular ones that I always hear a lot is 256. So 256 over 1.32 is equal to something over 1.4. Well, why are you using 1.4? Because you're all thinking you're getting a 280 cam, and you're all buying it at 1.4. So if you were gonna buy a cam from someone else, you'd be like, oh, I don't want that, I want the 280. I'm gonna show you exactly what they're selling you as if you were gonna see it on Schneider, Isky, Crower, what have you. So let's do the math here real quick. 1.32x is equal to 256 times 1.4. 256 times 1.4. Simple math. It's simple math. That gives you 358.4. Divide these out, and that'll give you basically what they gave you as if you were going to see it on a Schneider, who, what have you. So 358.4 times 1.32. Ooh, my bad. That's division. 358.4 divided by 1.32. A 271.5. So what they basically have sold you, if you were going to round it up, is a 272 cam. And that's actually kind of important to mention. A lot of 4H, a lot of 2JZ, 1JZ, even V8s. The biggest cam you want to go on the street with is a 272. So they're actually doing something here that maybe you'd like, but at the end, really all you're getting is a 256 at 1.32, and if you're buying your 280, all you're getting is a 264 at 1.32. If you want a 280 cam, all you have to do, and I guess I might as well just kill this right here. All you got to do is do all of this backwards. Like this one, just do that again. So let's say you want your true 280 at 1.32. That's equal to X over 1.4, since everybody sells at 1.4 except for BRD. No hate to BRD. I'm just, I'm independent here. I'm just giving you guys the facts. So times 1.4, that's 392. 392 divided by 1.32. You need a 296. And fun fact, there are websites that sell a 296 cam. You need this to have your 280. And some people will think, well, 296 is too big. Well, yeah, it is, because a 280 cam is massive for street use. Especially this cam card right here is for a 284 HL high lift from Schneider. And it's ground to a 107 lobe separation. That's thumpy. If you have Weber carburetors, the DCOEs, you can actually quiet this, but if you put like one or a centrifugal, you'll hear the 107. DCOE, since you can tune each individual cylinder, you'll get a smoother sound regardless. It'll always be a lot more accurate than a single, but that's for you guys to play with. That being said, the bigger cam that you have, you're gonna make more power. However, where are you making the power? Remember, horsepower is how fast your engine spins. Torque is how much is going to the ground. That's your foot-pounds. Torque is just force multiplied by radius. So the more torque you have, the farther out it's going to act like pushing it, basically like a lever. The smaller the torque, the less it'll do work-wise or torque-wise. So the bigger cam you have, typically the more duration, you're shifting the torque curve over, which is one of the reasons why BRD always gives you a smaller cam, because they're giving you the torque curve earlier in the rev range. If you were to have, and I'll just erase this real quick, since you can always rewind and check it out. If you were looking at a dyno sheet and you had a small cam, your torque curve may be somewhere around here. If you have a bigger cam, given all the other variables are the same duration-wise, your torque curve will actually stay this. It'll stay the same. It'll move over. Your torque, your peak torque will usually just be the same. That's why smaller cams are better for the street. Bigger cams are bigger for the track. Unless it's a weekend warrior, do whatever you want. I don't care. Your car. Let's talk about timing it and doing a poor man's degree if you don't have a wheel. Most of these cams, actually, you can put it on 0-0 and you'll be very close. However, sometimes you need to advance the cam or retard the cam a couple degrees just to see what's up. For example, this cam card gives you a lobe separation of 107. You degree the intake lobe to 105. So you're actually going off 2 units there. With doing this, always make sure you line up the keyway on the crankshaft up, and then the cam, the sprocket will have a little dot. Make sure that's 90 or 0, 90, whatever, as well. And then your engine will be timed rotationally. Take your distributor and put it close to the cylinder number 1 little striker. Since if you do this anyways, it's going to be top dead center, cylinder number 1. And as you push it in, make sure you key the oil pump correctly. That way, when you push it in and the gears mesh, the striker will move as it goes down. into the block, and you can be as close as possible to cylinder number 1. They're pretty big gears, so you should be able to figure this out just fine. When you do that, your cam is now at 0-0. I always recommend getting one of those little adjustable sprocket things. If someone tells you they slip, it's because they're not tightening them correctly. Remember, the more bolts you have, the less torque you typically have to put into them. For the one thing from ASP Racing, it's like 3 or 4. I usually just, I think it's 4 actually, I'm sorry. I usually just do them to about 15 foot-pounds each, since it's a stud and not a screw, so you're actually tightening it on the stud. That being said, if we take 15 times 4, overall you're going to have 60 foot-pounds of force, static, not dynamic, just static on there, neglecting any kind of other weird forces that may act on it, like the friction of rotating it, which will give you more resistance to switching over. That's more than enough. I mean, you torque the cam to 75 anyways, and if you have that little rotational piece, you have to pretty much torque that down before you torque the cam. So that'll be fine. That'll give you some adjustment of the cam when you can dial in your opening and closing events. What I typically do if I don't have a degree wheel, I do now, but when I didn't have a degree wheel, what I would do is I would time it, or I would phase it, is the correct terminology, for when the piston started to go up, that the valve opens, or starts to open, basically at least more than halfway of lift off the seat. That way when it was going up, it would just immediately start throwing out all exhaust gases, and when the overlap happens, it's really close to when it's coming back down. That way you can get the scavenging effects of the cam for higher RPM, so it runs more efficient, it gives you more power, and so that way you're not wasting intake valve. So basically you want the intake valve somewhat open already as the piston's all the way up. That's why you clay your engine to see how much clearance you have. Typically the smaller the gap, the more you need to be aware of heat expansion, which isn't really that much in terms of these things. If you're running like aluminum connecting rods, the heat expansion is like something like this, or that's shitty. It's usually around here somewhere is the heat expansion, so you need to take that into effect. That way you're not smacking valves and having unholy matrimonies in your combustion chamber. For steel, it's usually like a figure of 1. I mean, it's pretty minuscule, but it's space nonetheless, and you need to take into account how much is happening there. For me personally, with a 284 high lift cam, which has a 1/2 inch of lift, on stock pistons, I'm running about 2 degrees advanced, so it actually makes power a little earlier at around 2,900 RPM instead of the 32 where it's supposed to, but I drive it on the street every day, so I kind of need that little buffer. And I've clayed the engine. I have gads of room running 45 millimeter, no, it's either 45 or 46 millimeter intake and close to 40 millimeter exhaust, and it's running fine and still efficient. So yeah, so in terms of all the information, that's really all I have to give you. Make sure you just use the ratios to figure it out on your own, just to experiment. If you want the ratios again, I'll make it a little bigger, so is equal to this, and that is going to be the duration of the cam that you're seeing. So 280 over what they grounded at, and that's equal to your valve lift, or your rocker arm ratio underneath what it's going to act like. That's the math. There is no other, there probably is, I'm not going to say there isn't any other way to figure this out, but this is the simplest way. This also works for lift. So let's say it has a lift of 0.5 over 1.4, and that's equal to whatever lift it's going to be at 1.32. Calculator out, 1.32 times 0.5 is equal to 0.66. Then you divide the 1.4, so divided by 1.4, and you will actually have, instead of 1/2 inch of lift, you'll have 0.47, 1 inches of lift. So as you can see, that rocker arm ratio also affects how much lift you have. But of course it would, because I mean, if I'm pushing right here and I have all of this, look how much that's moving. However, if you change the ratio, it's not moving as much. It's a relationship. Well, that's all for today's video. I hope you use this information the best you can. I mean, I'm not really trying to start a revolution here, but if I can help at least one person, I'm happy. The next video that I'll be throwing out is the alternator upgrade. So I've already done the alternator upgrade myself. I've been running it for a couple of years now. I went from stock 3TC to the Saturn early style GM and later style GM. There's a big difference between all of them, of course, and I'll make sure to go through all of that in detail with you guys. Peace.